everyone. I'm Devon Sanders, and I'm the host of this week's episode of Fantastic Forum, coming to you from Victory Comics. This week's episode is all about comic book continuity. And first up, I'd like to introduce my guests, James Rambo, Dave Disspain, Roberto Ortiz.
Hola.
One of the things that interests me a lot about continuity in comics is that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It can be a noose, it could be a totally good touchstone, touch point. So just give me some thoughts on it. Anyone?
I was reading Guardians of the Galaxy. I think it was Guardians of the Galaxy #1. I'm not picking up #2. But that's a whole other conversation. But there's a scene where you have Tony Stark in his, it looks like Chinese space armor, flying around. And my first thought was, how does this match up with what he's doing on Earth right now? And then immediately, the jock in my head punched the nerd in my head in the face and was just like, just enjoy it. And I think that's what needs to happen. Kurt Busiek was talking about continuity once. I think he has like a blog post about it. And he's likened various characters to cake. So there's the Green Lantern cake, and there's the Superman cake, and there's the Avengers cake, and there's the JLA cake. And it's nice sometimes when you just get the cake on its own, right? But if you just keep piling everything together, you're gonna get stomachache. Yeah. And that's bad. Yeah. If it enhances, awesome. But when you're beholden to it and it screws things up, then it's no fun.
You don't want to have the writer, I guess, beholden to whatever Peter Parker, some writer did to Peter Parker 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Which is not even applicable to the present day. I mean, just because Peter Parker back in the 1970s decided to basically start using bell bottoms, and all of a sudden Peter Parker in the present, oh my God, he's using bell bottoms now. That's in contradiction. He actually in the 70s he was using bell bottoms, but he's saying in the comic book that he's wearing bell bottoms for the first time. That's wrong. And I have a problem with that because it's like there's this caricature of comic book readers that were these nerds with OCD that basically just go over panels and just say, mistake, that's wrong.
Well, there's a lot of that out there.
I know, and there's people actually who write blogs about stuff like that, but he's right. I think you should enjoy the story, and I think that I cannot believe I'm gonna say this. I don't blame the companies having to do reboots because the fans, and I think they do that because the fans can get a little bit too obsessive about the baggage that comes from the past. It's like, it's almost expected that you're supposed to know about something that happened in the 80s or something that happened in the early 70s to be able to keep up with a character in the present. Oh, there was a Secret Wars, and you know that, and that affects what's going on in the present. What if you're like a 10-year-old kid who's basically picking up the comic book for the first time? Yeah. Are you telling that kid that he has to read decades of continuity to keep up with the character? Does that make any sense?
There's something that I miss, which is editor's notes. Editor's notes used to be so much fun, just because it was like, okay,
also, just to preface this, editor's notes is something that hasn't been used for almost like since the 80s or the 90s.
Like it was, I think it was definitely into the 90s that you were seeing them, and it was almost like, it's like, no, we don't want everybody to realize that this is a comic book.
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, that's what it is. That's what you're doing. I mean, if you're going to build a world based on, serialized periodicals, reference things. Say like, oh yeah, you can know what they're talking about if you read this comic. And it made you work at it. It made you be like, oh, I got to get that issue.
Right.
If it enhances the story, great. Blackest Night, good or bad, there's some cool ideas there. And they wouldn't exist if not for Alan Moore's Tales from the Green Lantern Corps. Right. And he gets this bug up his butt because, like, oh, nobody can come up with an original idea. It's like, you wrote a story about a prophecy. Why can't we have the prophecy come true? Why is that such a bad idea?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example of when continuity works. But when you start having, like, every time, if they're going to flash back to Peter Parker in high school, I don't want to see him in a sweater vest and wearing bell bottoms, or I don't. Because like, well, those stories were written then. It starts to get problematic. And Roberto made a good point, which is, sometimes reboots are necessary just to wipe the slate clean and let's get down to the essence of the character.
Right. Absolutely. You got some feelings there?
I just feel like I read comics for the story.
Right.
And so I don't feel like there needs to be 800 pages of back issues that I need to go back and go through it. I want that story to tell me something, show me something, make me learn something, make me think about something, and I don't necessarily need just oodles and oodles of omnibus to go back and read through. I would just want to be entertained. And so if I understand, okay, Batman's decades old character, Superman's a decades old character, that's on me to go back, at least in my opinion, that's on me to go back and read what I feel like I need to read. And it's not necessarily up to the creator to educate me on decades worth of continuity or history for a character.
Right, and that's why I think a lot of people, like, one of the biggest arguments is, like, whenever you do, like, a movie reboot, you have to start over at square one. You have to give the people the origin, the secret origin of Spider-Man again. You have to give them the secret origin of Superman again. When, you know, these are stories that are, like, you know, they're within the time, but you can keep moving them forward. And quite frankly, I think even with the movie continuity, they hold them back sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Just move it forward. We know Superman was shot from a rocket.
I mean, and
Now-
if you want to establish that, in the first page of All-Star Superman, Morrison had in 4 panels covers 80 years of
Right.
storyline,
Right.
and he's like, you know, doomed planet, shot from there, raised by family, he's Superman. Like, that's it.
Boom.
You could
Story.
have every Superman or Batman, every Superman movie start with, you know, faster than a speeding bullet. Have it be like a radio bulletin.
Yeah.
Really quick. Here's where we need to go. Here's the intro, and have that be it.
Guys, you realize that part of the reason they do origin stories is because of trademark reasons, right?
See, I was wondering about that. I was wondering about that. How much of it is a rights issue, and how much of it is just a rehash because, like, this is the established property.
Trademarks. Oh God, trademarks. One of the things that we forget as fans is that Warner Brothers, Disney, see this as trademark characters that are intellectual properties that make money.
Absolutely.
At their core, that's what they are. And the reasons when you see a movie that you see the origin is because of trademarks. You're rebranding the characters. You're basically making sure that the IP has value in the future, that the copyrights and the trademarks for the character will not expire. So basically, when you're showing the origin of Krypton, you show the Jor-El, you show Lara, you're basically reintroducing the characters basically for intellectual property reasons.
Right, and I hear you, but does it actually help the story along?
They don't
Does
care.
it help the
Well, but go ahead, Dave.
Okay, what I was going to say was, let's do it in a more creative way then. Let's not spend a third of the movie talking about how Peter Parker got bit by a spider again. Let's do it during the opening credits. Make it the opening credits a story where you're seeing a montage of him in school and walking up and down the hallways and getting bit by a spider and blah, blah, blah. And you know, directed by, produced by, blah, blah, blah. So you get to see all of that. You have your story. It's part of the whole movie. And you have a creative outlet for, okay, we don't have to spend a third of the movie talking about something that everybody knows, even casual fans who don't really know a lot about comics.
Well, I happen to agree with that, but part of the problem is basically is the practicality of it. And the thing is that these companies keep thinking that this is a product that have to reintroduce to a brand new audience. I want to make sure that a 12-year-old who basically gets the character experience from the first time from a movie gets who Spider-Man is. And they don't make the assumption that they saw the first movie. They assume we have to reintroduce this product to a brand new audience.
Which, I mean, I get that, and that makes sense. But I think there's something to be said for there's a culture of hand-holding and having to, like, we need to make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what's going on. And I mean, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but like, video games expect more from kids than most everyone else does.
Yeah, right, sure.
So I mean, there's something to be said for, like, if you what is it, in res mensa, when you start right in the action, people will catch up.
Right.
People who are interested will get it. But I totally understand what you're saying, because a lot of the people who are, you know, have the money to spend have no interest and have no concept of how things are supposed to happen.
Nope. Could care less.
And that's something I don't really understand, which is, if you're the one responsible for all that, why wouldn't you hire the right people to take care of those things for you? Exactly. But that's, again, a whole other conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things, just myself personally, I do appreciate that you do want to hit the certain marks and points and all this other stuff. You don't want to deny a kid, maybe for the first time, seeing Superman's rocket going away from an exploding Krypton.
Yeah.
You don't want to see Peter make the vow. You don't want to miss, Uncle Ben telling Peter, with great power comes responsibility. So in that sense, I think continuity does work.
Iron Man getting drunk for the first time.
Tony Stark's first shot,
The example that I like to use for people who, when I talk about continuity, is Up, the animated movie. The first 8 or 9 minutes of that tell you everything you need to know about him and his wife.
That was brutal, by the way.
And it is. You cry. It's just what it is. But
we're all going to die.
That's back to my point about it not needing a whole film to invest in this. If it's done right and it's done well, you can do it in 10 minutes. And everybody's happy. Everybody gets it, and everybody understands. And you can use some of those powerful images, to tell the story. But you just got to do it right. I think we need a little more creativity in going back. And if we're going to have to introduce origins for business purposes, let's do it a little smarter. Let's do it a little more creative.
Okay, just hold on 1 second. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Fantastic Forum.
I'm Brian Bollins, and you're watching Fantastic Forum.
Billie Rae Bates for Fantastic Forum here at the Baltimore Comic Con, having a lot of fun. About to talk to Walt Simonson. Hi, Walt.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now, you are both a writer and an artist. Which would you say comes more naturally for you?
Maybe the art, in that I drew from younger than I can remember, so I never thought about being an artist. My father was a scientist. All the family friends were scientists. The idea of making a living doing a drawing was just, I never thought about it really. But when I wanted to become a professional, art was kind of the direction I went. The writing came afterwards. So I'm kind of an artist who became a writer later.
Okay. Now I know you've also collaborated with your wife Louise on some projects. Tell us a little bit about those.
Weezy began in comics as an editor. She became a writer later. So we ended up working together where she was the editor. I was drawing pictures for her in Battlestar Galactica or Star Wars. She was a writer. I worked for her as an artist were doing a book called X Factor for Marvel Comics together, the original X-Men. We've done some books, a book called Meltdown that we were co-writers on. It was a Havoc Wolverine story that Jay Muth and Kent Williams painted. And the two of us collaborated in the writing together. And literally there, one of us would type and type and type until you were exhausted. And then you would get up, maybe in the middle of a sentence. The other person would sit down and start typing and typing and typing. And at this point, a number of years later, I could not tell you where one of us began, the other one left off.
As a writer, what would you say of all the different characters that you've written in comics over the years, what has been the most challenging?
In some ways, maybe. I did a character called Orion, who's one of the new gods for DC. And the thing about Orion, unlike, say, Thor for Marvel, is that Orion he's not a very user-friendly guy. Like, Thor's kind of a guy you maybe wouldn't mind living next to, except that stuff keeps happening, so maybe you wouldn't want to live there. But Orion he's a warrior, he carries a very heavy burden. It doesn't necessarily make him a tremendously likable guy as a character, but it means as a comic, you need to write this guy so that he's both this tough warrior that maybe isn't very user-friendly, and yet you need to write him in a way that will attract the reader or interest readers who want to know more about him and stay with him.
Now, you were able to do a cameo in the Thor movie. That must have been so much fun. Tell us about that.
It was great. Marvel Entertainment or Marvel Film or whatever they're called, they were great to us. They invited us to come out. Weezy and I went out there. My editor, Ralph Macchio, who was my editor on Thor, came out. The three of us were there for 3 days. I have never been so tired when I got home.
Long days on the set.
I don't know how actors do it, or directors or anybody else on the set, but they really showed us all kinds of stuff. They were very kind to us, and we got to be in a scene. It was interesting because there's a lot more in the scene than you see. I mean, not from me, I'm just sitting there hanging out, eating all the food, but basically it was neat to see how movies were done, nuts and bolts. I like movies. I don't have any desire to do movies, but I have to say, being out there for that length of time, watching them do that, it made making movies look like, by George, this just might be fun.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what other movies would you like to do a role in?
Well, I didn't do a role in it, but I actually saw filming. I started filming a little bit of Alien. Many years, I did the graphic novel adaptation for Heavy Metal, so I was able to be on the set for Alien over in England, and that was also pretty interesting. So I don't know. Well, there's a new Thor movie coming up, so I believe I got my SAG card. I'll be available.
I'm sure there'll be a feast scene.
I'm sure they'll be right on top of me. But it was very cool. And we got to just see how a lot of the nuts and bolts actually work. And see how the director worked with the actors and try to make things all come together, especially when you're refilming the same thing several times and you want to keep it fresh. And it was just fun to see the sets, see all you can see all the green screen. You're going, this is going to be a lot bigger when they get done, and it was a lot bigger when they got done. So it was very neat. We had a really good time, and as I said, they could not have been nicer to us or shown us stuff or talked to us, or just all the stuff that they did. It was wonderfully hospitable, and it was just really exciting. It was fun.
Okay, and so what is coming up next for you?
Maybe create our own stuff, and that means looking around and seeing what that market is like. It's not really a market I've done much with or been involved with much for a long time, and it's really exploded in the past bunch of years. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The talent of Randy Bowen brings the Black Panther to life in this statue from Bowen Designs. T'Challa, son of T'Chaka, king of the Wakandans, is ready for action. Bowen's fabulous sculpt has perfectly captured the essence of the African Avenger. With every muscle taut, the Panther is posed to spring into action against the forces of evil. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the Black Panther debuted in 1966 in Fantastic Four number 52. He was the first black superhero to appear in mainstream American comics. Originally released in 2004, this cold-cast porcelain-painted sculpture features a highly detailed, jungle-themed base. The statue is 13 inches high and weighs approximately 8 pounds. Bowen Designs Black Panther statue.
And welcome back to Fantastic Forum. I'm Devon Sanders, and we've been talking about continuity. And one of the things I wanted to talk with the guest about was one of our favorite writers, Grant Morrison.
Polarizing.
Who's one of the most polarizing writers in all of comicdom. And right now he is writing Batman Incorporated. DC Comics just rebooted the whole universe, and Grant Morrison said, I don't care. And went on to write the Batman comics that he wanted to write. Just sort of said, screw continuity. He's creating his own continuity. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and possibly a little bit later some of the Marvel stuff too.
It's funny that you mention the way Morrison's handling it versus the way other people are handling it. It's funny, and it strikes me as funny that DC was very practical in some regards and completely unpractical in others with their relaunch, which is the books that are doing the best will have the most minimal changes. Right. Batman and Green Lantern, there is no change. They flow perfectly from old 52 to new 52. But then you get things like Superman, you get things like Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman's been great, but it's a big departure. There's a lot of different things. And I look at Scott Snyder's Batman versus Grant Morrison's Batman, and Morrison has been very much like I don't care. I'm just going to go over here and do some Escalon and then write about Damien getting stabbed. And then you have Snyder who's like, yeah, but there's all this history. And you get this excitement from him, and there's this kinetic feel to everything he's writing. And again, it just flows perfectly. He's paying. When I read Court of Owls, I was positive that these were characters from like Neil Adams' run.
Absolutely.
That I missed. I was like, oh, this must be an old Batman thing that I just don't know about because it was done so seamlessly. Snyder understands that you can. There's ways to adapt. There's ways to modify things.
build.
To build on it, and that's what continuity should be. If it's not helping in the construction, then just tell your own story. Build your own little house over here, and we'll just keep doing things over here. That's fine.
You know what? I know this sounds contradictory in terms of the topic that we're talking about continuity, but there's a way, if you're a good writer, like in the Court of Owls, to express ideas that seem timeless, and a new reader can pick them up immediately, and not be the kind of writer that has to refer, oh, well, remember Secret Wars from back in the 80s? That relates to what's going on now. No. If you're a good writer, you don't need to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely. And Peter Tomasi,
Oh, sorry.
in both Green Lantern Corps and in his Batman and Robin run, has done these really cool explorations of characters that I didn't necessarily care about.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand Damian Wayne when he was introduced. I'm like,
Exactly.
who is this little brat? He's a pain in the ass. I don't like him. Make him go away.
The Robin we have right now is absolutely fine.
He's perfect. He's great. Let's keep that.
Right.
And I was vehemently against the Dick Grayson Batman. Couldn't stand the idea. And the first issue of Tomasi's Batman and Robin run, before the relaunch, before the DC reboot, Damian is in the morgue with Dick as Batman and Jim Gordon, and he makes some crack about the body, and Jim Gordon grabs him by the wrist and throws his hand up behind his back, and he's like, if you ever insult the body in my presence again, you will not be allowed to come along on these little field trips.
Wow.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
He's like, yes. And it was just, somebody perfectly put him in his place.
Right.
And for some reason, that's when it clicked. Damian Wayne is Bruce Wayne at that age
Exactly.
without Alfred.
Exactly.
And it was such a
Exactly.
cool idea. And I say all that to say, I'm certainly not the first person to say this, but Morrison killing off Damian before he leaves DC Comics is very much, rings very much to me like, I'm taking my toys and I'm going home.
That's a middle finger to the fans, to be
Yeah.
perfectly honest. It's like, it is. Screw it. I'm just going to kill off the character. I don't care of the consequences.
We're certainly getting into. I certainly have one more point about Morrison before the batch is over. A Superman comic written by Grant Morrison and drawn by Rags Morales should be phenomenal.
It should.
Be the best thing on the shelf, and it was one of the most boring
God,
comics
yes.
I've ever read.
And but also, and let's go back to like sort of continuity. Now, All-Star Superman was not in continuity.
No, not at all.
Fantastic
But
book.
also, when you're reading this new Action Comics Grant Morrison thing, you're sitting there going, DC's created a new continuity. And Grant Morrison is like, I don't care.
It's like whatever.
I don't
I'm
care.
gonna do something
I'm going
over
to tell
here.
this story about this guy who's running around in a Superman t-shirt.
Yeah,
and
'cause
I
why
don't care
not?
what's going on.
Well,
and I'm
and-
not going to tell the guy who's actually writing Superman what's going on.
Yeah.
So he basically has to build his own stories. Good luck
And
with that.
to a certain point, to give Morrison some leeway here, DC's whole dictum with the relaunch was, we'll figure it out.
How hard
And
could
it's
it
like,
be?
yeah. and it's like what was it, Tom Baker's Doctor Who? It's like, well, how many times can you regenerate? He's like, 13, and that became canon. And it feels like that's what happened with it was like, well, how long has the universe been around? How long have superheroes been here? Like, 5 years.
Right.
Like it was just the
About
first
5
thing that
years,
came in their
no
head.
one
They're
else.
like, bruh.
But so let's get into like Marvel now. Right now, one of the big controversies is Peter Parker isn't Spider-Man anymore.
People are losing their
And
minds
people are
over
losing
superhero
their
Spider-Man.
minds.
It's hysterical.
When I actually think with Dr. Octopus filling in for Spider-Man, you got like some great storylines because
there's some
Right,
really
yeah.
cool potential there. The idea that there's just enough of Peter left
Yeah.
that it's sort of like making Doc
Right.
Ock be a good guy, but he's conscious of it. He's
Right.
like, I don't want to be helping
But
people.
let me just make this point really quickly. But I think that this is the great conceit of Superior Spider-Man, is that when you're initially reading Spider-Man, and it goes back to continuity, J. Jonah Jameson is like, that Spider-Man, he's a menace. Oh. And you're sitting there going, no, he's one of the good guys because you're the reader.
Yeah.
Now, you're basically going to J. Jonah Jameson. You're saying, J. Jonah, he's not one of the good guys.
He's a
And
bad man.
Jonah is like, no, he's one of the good guys. He's
Yeah,
an
he's helping
Avenger. He's
everybody
running
out.
with
It's great.
Captain America. This
Everything's
is great.
wonderful.
So in that sense, I think the continuity is one of the greatest things in the world if you can actually stomach all that.
Yep.
So yeah, I think
I-
that it actually works sometimes.
And to go back to ideas with All-Star Superman, it's not even necessarily about the continuity. It's more about here's the universe they've built.
Yep.
And it's here's how we're going to work within that. And the idea that, well, this is what Jonah thinks. Jonah thinks that, and because it doesn't have to be that, like, well, in issue 738 of Spider-Man, Jonah said this. It's more, he just doesn't like Spider-Man. And that is a facet of his character, and it's something that you can explore and really go back to. So to flip that, so that it's now the audience being like, no, everything's wrong, is really cool. But with regard to continuity reboots in general, man, Marvel has got their act together.
Yes, they do.
I mean,
They
from
really
the
do.
movies to the Marvel Now stuff, which I was like, this is a terrible idea. I'm reading Indestructible Hulk.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm reading Wolverine and the X-Men. Yeah, I want to read it. All you have to say is, I'm Jason Aaron, and I'm writing a comic where Wolverine is the headmaster at the Xavier School.
So
Yeah, you
shut
got
up
me.
and take my money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm down. Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
And there you go. And on that note, we have to end things. It's another great episode of Fantastic Forum, and we hope to see you again. Take care.
Join the Fantastic Forum fan community on Facebook and follow us on Twitter for all the latest news and updates.